Oh, thank you. It is more in the nature of an announcement than it is a comment. I'm sure most of you realize that there was a big hearing on the El Encanto before the City Council yesterday. After 4.5 hours, the City Council unanimously voted to send the plans back to the Planning Commission, instructing the Orient Express to consult with the neighbors and provide plans for an acceptable aesthetics solution to their principal concerns. These are a noisy 43-car valet surface parking lot and a 2,800 square foot so-called utility distribution facility. This is to provide, the facility is a cooler that has pumps and things in it that would provide cool air to air condition all the cottages. And they're, of course, as you all know, they're on the northwest corner, and that's what bothered the neighbors. The issue is to return to the City Council. Well, they said, I thought they said 60 to 90 days. The paper says 90. I don't know how it could be done, because I know from being here and how you went back and forth on the open parking lot and finally gave your reluctant approval. But if the utility distribution facility, I mean, I'm sure the utility distribution facility has to be moved by the city per the directions of the City Council. Could this commission, and maybe it would require another hearing, to get some kind of message to the Planning Commission that a covered parking or underground parking structure is much more acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Will you please fill out a little form later when you are... Thank you.
Gladly. You're welcome. Bob Cunningham, member of the Street Tree Advisory Committee. I'm here. You've apparently all got a copy of the letter that I sent. Some of the assumptions that I made when I wrote the letter may have been incorrect, and I apologize for that, but I think the substance it remains intact. It's become clear that there was some serious failure to communicate or miscommunications or something with regard to the Arlington silk oak, which disappeared from 1309 State Street. The tree was replaced with, in my opinion, and the opinions of others on the Street Tree Advisory Committee, with an inadequate alternate tree. We don't feel that there was any reason why another silk oak couldn't have been installed there. The tree that was there had survived for well over 3/4 of a century, having a planter built around it. It never caused any physical damage to the space in which it was installed, and now we have fairly common these days cork oak replacing a landmark tree. It just shouldn't have happened. Series of rhetorical questions. If the Arlington's tower had been damaged by lightning, would you have allowed a different design in its place? Would we start replacing the Italian stone pines on Anapamu Street with a different species? We wouldn't. We continue to hold Public Works' feet to the fire and replace those trees as they die with stone pines, even though it causes the city, or costs the city, thousands of dollars, probably every year, to take care of those trees, repair pavement, and so on. We do that because we're trying to keep our city's heritage intact. And when a landmark tree disappears, maybe the appropriate thing is to replace it with another of like species and not something completely different for the convenience of either the city or a private applicant. So, if we don't already have protocol intact for communicating with regard to what we do when a landmark tree is threatened, we do need to get something like that in place. And then there has to be an open line of communication between, in this case, our committee and HLC, so that all, not necessarily opinions, but all expertise can be brought to bear on the subject. It's my opinion that the applicant in the case of 1309 State Street was obviously driven by his own business and personal interests. I can't fault an applicant for that, but I think it was the job of all of us to make sure that we upheld our traditions and replaced that tree with the appropriate species. So, I would appreciate it if we don't already have, as I said, protocol intact to deal with this, then we need to get to that point rather quickly before something like this happens again. And I'm certainly willing to come back if this commission feels it's appropriate to discuss this and take action. And I know that members of the Street Tree Advisory Committee are very willing to sit down with representatives of HLC and staff to try to make sure it never happens again. I'd also like to point out, just in doing some research on this issue, that the city's urban forest supervisor has this particular list of historic specimen and landmark trees, which is not entirely in agreement with the list of trees in Appendix C of the new EPV guidelines.
Oh dear.
So that needs to be looked into. There aren't serious problems, but the Fernald eucalyptus, which was landmarked by this commission, I'm saying maybe 10 years ago when the Office Max project was approved, is not on this list. This is your EPV guidelines list. So that's something that needs to be corrected. And hi, Jaime.
Let me respond to that, because I want to make sure that this commission is aware of it. Jaime Limon, Senior Planner. There was a conscious decision to determine whether we should list all trees throughout the city versus just in EPV. Mm-hmm. So if you want trees also to be included outside EPV, that's a decision this commission can also make.
The eucalyptus, the Fernald eucalyptus, was declared a landmark by
I'm not disputing
this commission.
it's not a landmark, but the question is whether we should include all the trees in the city outside EPV in this guideline document.
Well, that's a good point. I know that there are the Parks Department list has 3 different locations of other trees that are specimen trees, specimens that are protected or should be. It was my impression that historic landmark trees would fall under the jurisdiction of this body and therefore ought to be listed under the EPV guidelines. But, obviously it's not something I need to deal with. I'm just bringing it to your attention. So that concludes my presentation. I very much appreciate your time.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions?
I want to respond, and I realize that this could have been a misstep on my part and the commission's part, but in order to move ahead into the future, I would like the Street Tree Committee to entertain that I would be a liaison to that committee and check in. You know, I don't know if they'd be willing to do that, but I don't want this kind of thing to happen again, and I want to move forward in a positive way, so that you know, if the public speaker could suggest that to your committee and get back to me, I would like to be that liaison. So when we do have issues of important street trees and things like that, we can communicate. And I think communication needs to be improved.
I will say that there was an attempt to do that, and between the Street Tree Advisory Committee and HLC, the communication did not take place. We asked that it did, you know, that was passed on, and for some reason it was not.
Fermina?
This has happened before. My biggest concern is a tree was cut down without this commission notified. And that was the crux of the problem from the very beginning.
I can respond
and I
to that.
think,
I can respond to that.
and
That-
I,
that
well, I
ecological
think
response.
the arborist
Madam
should
Chair.
have not allowed, make a
We
decision.
can't have a discussion about this item.
Because it
We-
was not
It's not
agendized. I
agendized. We
understand.
can return back and give you a complete explanation about what events did occur.
Why don't we agendize it?
And in that response, we can give you some assertion that in the future, this miscommunication will not happen again.
Okay.
That's great.
If-
Thank you.
We'll agendize it. I imagine you'll be notified.
Thank you. That would be wonderful.
Okay, and we'll make sure that-
the Street Tree Advisory Committee has a meeting next Thursday.
Okay.
A week from tomorrow, we'll bring this up. And,
Okay.
I'd like to add that Carol Bornstein, the chair of the advisory committee, intended to be here but could not, unfortunately. But she asked
Thank
me
you.
to represent her position.
And I just think this is symbolic of the fact that we really do care about our trees. And people are coming up. No, but that disparate elements come forth when something like this happens, and I think it's a great sign. So thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any more public comment? Seeing none, the next item is approval of the minutes for April 15th. I have a motion to approve.
So move.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Are there any additions or revisions or corrections? Apparently not. Gabrielle, perfect. So all those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? The minutes are approved. Consent calendar, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. Item A, 1529 Santa Barbara Street was final approval with conditions. Item B, 1302 State Street was final approval as submitted. Item C will be heard or reviewed by this commission at 4:15, or rather, I believe Commissioner Adams is going to take a look at it. It's just landscaping, final approval of landscaping. Item D at 532.5 State Street is final approval as noted. Item E, 1535 Santa Barbara Street was final approval as submitted. Item F, 2014 Garden Street was final approval as noted. And the consent calendars were reviewed by Commissioner Sharp except for items, well, C and I believe F, one of them he hasn't reviewed yet. So I'm going to request that the consent calendar be ratified after that item, so if we could table that until afterwards. Would that work?
Yes, I have a motion to that effect.
So moved.
All those in favor? That motion. We are tabling that. Next item is announcements, requests by applicants.
Madam Chair, I would like to announce that the Santa Barbara Conservancy has published their first book entitled The Stone Architecture of Santa Barbara, and that documents a lot of the history of the stonework on the Riviera and Montecito. And next Thursday, a week from tomorrow night, as part of the first Thursday, there is going to be a book signing and a reception at the Casa de la Guerra courtyard in conjunction with a stone exhibit that the Trust has had for about a month or two. And lastly, that the book is dedicated to John Pittman.
Thank you. Are there any other announcements?
Yeah, Madam Chair. to announce that there's a nonprofit in town called Santa Barbara Beautiful, and the organization is accepting nominations for good character of architecture and landscape architecture that can be seen around town. And if people go to the website, www.sbbeautiful.org, they can nominate a property. And I'm just going to say it's kind of the Academy Awards, if you will, every year for landscape.
Is your icon?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There it is. I need the microphone.
It's on, but it's not done. Thank you.
Okay.
May
So
I?
I'm just announcing nominations are due for Santa Barbara Beautiful.
Thank
I
you.
would just like to add to that occasionally a sign gets, I don't know about the other things, but a sign gets the award which has no permit. So I hope that will be checked out.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
We are back. I'm the senior planner with Heather Baker, project planner. Wanted to mention to you that the guidelines were printed, first draft, for publication and review by City Council. And in the context of proofreading the document again, we found some additional changes. And I asked Heather to go ahead and prepare an errata sheet, which has been passed out for you. And if you have any questions about these items, we don't believe most of them are in any controversy nature. We did canvass the subcommittee to ask them if they had any questions with regard to these last changes. And I think the one that I do want to note is that the sales map was changed at the last minute, and I don't think the commission was aware of the change. Robert Uli from the county requested that some past sales be included in and around the county buildings and the courthouse. And we actually went and field verified these pasels, and we were concerned about the actual orientation of these pasels. And we now have a revised version that's been prepared that that in this general area gives a better indication of the actual connections and walkways that would be made as you enter the courthouse and transverse across the county property. And that would not entail going across lawn areas. We didn't think that was an actual paseo, even though it's a shortcut essentially through the site. So this is the proposed replacement paseo. And I don't know if, Heather, you wanted to mention anything else on the errata sheet of note. Well, actually, that was another thing. That we wanted to try to respect the original name of the guidelines, and the name was Guidelines El Pueblo Viejo. Nowhere along there was the name Design Guidelines noted, yet we kept the same name on the title, but within the document, we actually call them Design Guidelines. And I believe our subcommittee agrees that they are Design Guidelines. So we intend to have that be named as the EPV Design Guidelines, but the titles change not to remain as consistent with the previous versions. And if the commission is okay with that, we will proceed on that assumption.
Do you need a motion, or are we just
No,
gonna
it's just
move on?
concurrence.
Is there
If there are any
is there
objections
anybody who
to that.
objects? No objection. Very good.
Comment.
Okay.
I'm a pretty good proofreader, which is why I have this communication, but there's grammatical things that should be kind of dealt with. Maybe periods should be placed.
Mr. Drury, we've made several requests to have people submit these red lines. So I would like to have you submit those so we can incorporate them. Because we are scheduled now to go to council on May 12th. It's been pushed back 1 week. But on May 12th, we would like to present council with the actual final version that will be printed. And we don't want to print a document that has some of those mistakes. So I would encourage you to submit those. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yes.
At least in these documents, the black and white pages are not printed as well as the color pictures. You're aware of that, right? Like the quality of the black and this is not the same. So I want to be aware. Also, another thing on appendix, maybe it's just the way that it was printed, on the fast.
It's probably the paper quality.
But on the, if the intent is to list everything that is only within the Pueblo Viejo, like here's a list of notable arcades on page 17, and we have the National Guard Armory, which is, I don't think it's within Pueblo Viejo. So shouldn't that, I mean, should it be consistent through the document? And just kind of wondering.
Well, I think you're right. I think we struggled with this appendix, and we do have an extended list of landmark trees that are outside EPV. We just felt that there are inventories that we have, including all landmarks and structures of merits that we have reference to. And if you would like changes there, we could tweak them if there's some confusion there.
Madam Chair, actually, I would suggest that where there's examples of Hispanic architecture throughout the city that are worthwhile noting or looking at as examples, those are included in the document. So, for example, Appendix E and the chapter that has all the different buildings list examples outside the EPV. But for the tree list, I think the focus there was more for preservation. And obviously, within EPV, you don't need to be worrying about preserving trees that aren't in EPV. So I think there's another place for that larger, more comprehensive list.
We do have that list.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
To respond to Commissioner Peugeot's concern about the print quality, I asked Allison about that because I noticed it too. It was almost like a gray version, and she said the color. It's because it's almost like a color copy. The picture, the sheets with the color photos have the nice dark text. The sheets with the black and white pictures are the ones that look too light. And she was going to ask the printer about that, and hopefully the finals don't look like that.
Thank you. Apparently I have public comment on this item, and if you'll be brief, that would be good. Thank you.
I've always, it's a wonderful document, and it tells everybody about what Spanish revival architecture should look like, or does look like. But although it's not mandated for the rest of Santa Barbara, it certainly needs to be indicated that it would be useful for the rest of Santa Barbara, that it's not just restricted to the El Pueblo Viejo. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other announcements? Yes, thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioners Curtis and Schallenberger will be absent today. Chair Naylor will be stepping down from items 4 and 5 at 2300 Garden Street and item 6 at 1210 State Street. Commissioner Sharp will be leaving at 5:30 and Commissioner Murray will be leaving at 6 p.m. Item 9, which is the last item on the agenda, has been 1978 Mission Ridge Road has been postponed indefinitely at the architect's request, and so the item from consent will be reviewed at that time. And then, actually, Mr. Lamone stated that the guidelines presented to City Council is postponed, so that is postponed to Tuesday, May 12th. And then to clarify for the HLC and the public the distinction between historic landmarks or historic resource findings and findings for alterations to historic landmark or a structure of merit, if a minor project hasn't had a structures report prepared or required, then at project approval, the HLC needs to make historic resource findings for purposes of environmental assessment for CEQA. On projects where the historic structures report's been prepared and accepted by this board, acceptance means that you agree that the project will not adversely impact the historic resource, and resource findings may only be required to be made for purposes of the historic structures ordinance. If the building is a structure merit, a landmark, or is worthy of landmark status. So I just I may be asking you to make findings more often, is what that boils down to. I always give the chair a list of the, kind of a prompt of which ones need findings, so there may be more on that list. And that's all I have. Mr. Jacobus has an announcement.
Just real quick, I passed out a letter from the Department of Parks and Recreation from the state historian. This is regarding the first item that you're going to be hearing, the solar panels at the School of the Arts. I just wanted to let you know that you have it, so if you want to take a quick look at it before we actually review that item. Basically, that we had asked them to give us something that we could use in the place of our normal letter report. This is kind of short and sweet, but to the point, and it shows how the state determined that this is not a negative impact on the historic resource. And it's also a state-owned property, so I think this is pretty much going to be the clincher for us.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I turn it back to you.
Thank you. The next item is subcommittee reports. If there are none, if there are any possible ordinance violations, please fill out a slip and let us know. First item, and we are behind, is a discussion item with a presentation about the financial plan and operating budget for 2010.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm Paul Casey, Community Development Director, and I'll give the presentation today, and I'll keep it short if you like. The budget's bad, and there are no good answers. That's pretty much where we're at, but I'll walk you through briefly here. City released its budget document last Tuesday, April 21st, and gave the overall budget picture of the city of Santa Barbara. I gave a presentation on Thursday for our department's presentation. We were actually first up 2 days after, and so we didn't have a chance to come to the boards and commissions prior to our department presentation to the council, but we did commit to going to our boards and commissions, which we wanted to do, and get your feedback, and we want to transmit that to council as well. What I've handed out is a summary of the PowerPoint, just gives some overall information. It is a little small. We can make you a different copy if you'd like, but it shows how we talk about the redevelopment agency, which is part of the budget, as well as our community development block grant and rental housing mediation, and then also the general fund. And what we're here to talk today about is primarily the general fund, which impacts the planning staff and the Support to Historic Landmarks Commission in particular. Citywide, the city has a general fund budget of just over $100 million, and we're needing to make adjustments of about $10 million. And so it's about a 10% adjustment. When you look at other cities throughout the state of California, everyone's kind of in the same ballpark, with ranges of 5% to 20% reductions that they're having to deal with the change in the economic climate. So we're not alone. We're dealing with it, and we all read about it in the paper every day. So the main issue for us, though, is the impact to the general fund. And on page 6 of this handout, there's a summary slide that shows all the adjustments made for all the departments that need to be met. And the policy decision was to reduce the police and fire budgets by about 5%, just under 5%, and the rest of the non-safety departments about 10%. There was just a policy decision by the city administrator to not impact public safety quite as much as the other departments, and I think the City Council was pretty much in line with that feeling as well. But we are one of the larger general fund supported departments, so our adjustment is about $1 million off of about a $10.5 million general fund budget, and so our adjustment as a department is about 10% as well. And so that's not easy. About 75% of our costs are labor. It's our staffing. We're a labor-intensive department, and so when we make adjustments, unfortunately, it's going to hit our labor reduction as well. There's an organization chart that also shows the department organization, but the general fund supported departments are primarily planning and building and safety, and so the adjustments then need to be focused in that regard. And then on page 7, there's a good summary slide that shows we're going to reduce our line items by about $110,000 to try to save as much as we can, but we still want to support our staff going forward so they're not completely eliminated. There's some special one-time revenues, about $165,000, and that's some creative work that we're doing, especially with our Public Works Department. They had a couple of projects that they were going to need some outside planning assistance to kind of help finish some permitting approvals. And so working with them, we're going to contract with them instead. The good news means is that we can keep more staff around. We don't have to make those additional cuts, and that's good to keep the human capital for when the economy turns around and we're able to have a little more staff to respond to that. The bad news is from a workload standpoint is that while we're keeping the existing staff, they are going to be committed to these public works projects because we're getting paid for them. And so it is an effective reduction in our ability to keep meeting our workload targets, but it does keep staff around. And then unfortunately, we're looking at eliminating about 9 positions to make the rest of the adjustments available. We have been seeing this coming. We've been holding positions open throughout the last year, and so that allows about 6 vacancies that we've had over time, mostly in building and safety, so that those elimination of positions are much more straightforward and easy. Unfortunately, there were 3 additional positions that are staff that we are going to have to eliminate, and that makes it difficult on the organization and everyone involved. On the revenue side, we are proposing to increase revenues, but a relatively modest amount compared to other years. Building permit fees increasing 8% to try to keep them at full cost recovery. And then on the planning side, land development fees, we are proposing a 10% fee increase. These fees are still pretty heavily subsidized by the general fund. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been pretty aggressive in raising those fees to try to reduce the general fund support. We just didn't feel now was the time to have another aggressive fee increase, though, with the economy and economic climate, and so we're recommending a 10% increase. We aren't proposing any increase in revenues because the volume of work we're seeing is just so varied and unpredictable that we didn't feel we could really predict what kind of revenue we would get from those fee increases. On the line items, we've reduced all of our hourly salaries. That primarily supports our enforcement staff. We have been effective, especially in the last year, with a really good enforcement team that we have in place that's been assisted by some additional hourly work. Maggie Walker, who's done a really good job for us, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to continue that kind of extra needed support. And so I think we're going to feel it on the enforcement side, which is hard because enforcement actually in this climate is probably increasing from a workload standpoint, and yet we're going to have to reduce our staff support to it, and so that we're heading in the wrong direction in that regard. Whereas like in building and safety and in development review, we definitely have seen a slowdown in activity, and so the reduction in workload is a little more consistent in that regard. The positions in particular, if you look at the 2 different sections, about 4.5 positions in building and safety are going to be eliminated, and 4 positions in planning. Planning is about twice the size of building and safety, so proportionally building and safety is taking a larger reduction in staff. But again, there's a consistency with the workload level that's pretty direct. Whereas on the planning side, we do have development review that has slowed down a little bit, but there's a lot of policy work that we still wanted to get done that will be impacted by this reduced workload. And that is a lot of the special assignments and ordinances, which we've listed there on page 8. We have a number that are still active that we feel that we can keep getting at. The neighborhood preservation update, some upper state guidelines, some of the historic resources work program in the Mills Act we want to keep moving forward with. But there are going to be a number of pending and deferred projects that it's just going to be slower and harder for us to get to. And just kind of a direct example of someone that you work with is Heather Baker. And Heather's great and it's been productive at getting some things done. She's going to take one of the assignments with Public Works, and so her workload and ability to commit to doing some of those special projects is going to be reduced. And pretty much every section in the department is taking a reduction in kind of its staffing support. And so it's kind of across the board in that regard. Still have a number of major development projects going on, though. Don't want to leave people with the impression that nothing is happening. We have 6 EIRs that we're working on, which is quite a bit. And so there's still things happening. We're still going to have appeals and coastal development permits as well. Some of the service level impacts that we've identified, plan check reviews being a little slower. I talked about the enforcement issue. On the building side, a concern about being able to meet our same-day inspection requests and issues like that, just kind of a summary level. In addition to the $1 million adjustment, the city administrator asked each department to come up with a contingency adjustment, and that allows council the flexibility if they don't like what's proposed to see where else they might go, or if the economic and revenue conditions deteriorate even more. And so we're looking at $260,000 in addition to the $1 million as a contingency adjustment. And essentially we need to meet that, we would need to eliminate 2 additional positions. And we put down an additional item there, and you'll see it. It's the eliminate the board and commission stipends. And we wanted to kind of get your feedback on that. It was a tough one for us because we think the volunteers are fabulous, and this was something in the last few years we were able to increase the stipends for Historic Landmarks Commission and ABR. But as we were just crunching the numbers and looking at our budget and having to add more additional staff reductions, you know, it's $50,000 for board and commission stipends. And so we put it on the contingency list just to get some feedback and reaction as to whether that's a viable option or not. And so we'd like to hear from that. We've already been to the sign committee and the single family design review board, and their reaction was yes, but quite frankly, it's the food budget that we're kind of more interested in. I think it was ABR who mentioned that in particular, that they have very long meetings, and so they're here through dinner time until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And they said, you know, rather than the stipend check, just don't so cut our food budget so that we can have some decent food to kind of carry us through the evening. And that was interesting feedback, and so that was good. So essentially, that's where we're at with the budget. It's not great. It's not great for all the departments. The City Council is going through and holding hearings for all the different departments, and while we've missed our department presentation, there is kind of public comment during any of the budget meetings that if you wanted to attend a council meeting, you could. But we're also here right now to kind of get your feedback and reaction. If there's anything you would like us to forward to City Council comment-wise, we're happy to do that as well. But I'll wrap up and answer questions.
Thank you, but first I'll open to public comment. Is there any public comment about this? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission if there are questions.
Madam Chair, I do have a question. Does this mean no custard cups? 'Cause
That's the type of feedback we're
those were a
looking
very significant item.
We just may have to cut them up. And,
but on a more serious note, our stipends are honorary and welcome, but I think I personally, since we're in such shortfall in general, I'd be willing to give mine up.
I think you know. Good thing.
Correct.
I imagine we would all say that. It's just not for
Thank
people
you.
to be cut.
Now,
It's just.
I do have a question. What is the likelihood of the contingency moving forward? Pretty likely?
That's
your estimation, not that it's in stone or anything.
Commissioner Adams, that's the $164,000 question going around right now. It's hard for me to predict. We were the first department that presented last Thursday. Next week, the Parks and Recreation and Library Department, who are also impacted pretty heavily, are coming up, and then the public safety departments are coming up. Between you and me and the television audience and the rest of the world, there's some opportunity with the stimulus money to get some grants to help support public safety, especially on the police side, such that their budget impacts may really be offset by some additional stimulus money. That gives me hope that there might not be as much kind of trading of revenues between departments, that we wouldn't have to go to the contingency list. I think my bigger fear for the contingency list is if the revenues continue to fall away even steeper than we're pretty conservatively estimating them now, such that we may not need to go to the contingency list as part of the budget adoption the next month or two. But over the next year, if things continue to get worse and we need to make some mid-cycle adjustments, that's probably where we'll start looking at.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Are there any additional comments or questions? Yeah.
I have a comment regarding the stipends. I like the idea that you're paying to your volunteers. I think it's a good it's a good action. I think it's a symbol of recognition. And if this needs to go away for a year or two, well, that will be okay. But I don't want this to disappear. I think it would be a retreat from the symbol for a year. It has a symbolic meaning. My experience when I donated architectural work, did work pro bono, most of the time it's not recognized. It's kind of like, oh, okay, well, this person has given it up. It must be some other interest behind or something like that. So I kind of, I feel pretty strongly about that. And when it comes to budget time, I will bring my pet peeve. I think I have brought every single year for the last 10 or 12, the idea of the appeals. Something needs to be worked out along those lines. I understand that people have the right to appeal, and you cannot make it impossible. But you cannot make it a giveaway. It was a case in which I actually, I was part of a case involving when an applicant appealed all of the decisions in the whole hearing. There were like 4 or 5, and I appealed all of them. Well, okay. And I've been in cases where the applicant doesn't even show up at the day of the appeal and drops it at the last minute. This creates a lot of work for the city, and the work that disappears. So maybe there is a provision in which if you win the appeal, you get your money back or something like that. Maybe there's a way to do that kind of a thing. But I resent the fact that you can mobilize the city, have long meetings, you can go to city council, block the whole. I mean, it's not that I'm against the concept of last night, but it was a long night. I'm sure that cost, I don't know, $40,000 or something. I mean, when you start adding everybody in there from both sides and so forth. So anyway, I just want to put that word one more time. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Murray.
I have one comment on the page 8 on those special assignment, the service level impacts. And and it's really important for our commission to see these projects move forward, especially the historic surveys and the neighborhood surveys and all these things. And I was wondering if there's a way that the city could find a way to engage some volunteer work to help with those things, because there are organizations in this town that are so willing to help the city, and now we don't have that service with the city anymore because Jake is so overloaded that there's nobody there to coordinate the service from the community. And a lot of these things, for instance, like in the survey, the designations, we have so many buildings that need designation, but Jake has no time to prepare the designations. There are owners who have agreed to have this designation, but there's no time. So I was just wondering if there's a way that you find a way to engage the public more on volunteer work, because there's so many who really would like to help, and that would certainly help move some of these projects forward that have been on the calendar for so long. So I'd be happy to be part of that assistance. And so just let me know.
Thank you. I think that is something we probably need to look at again. We've done that over the years, some with success, some not so successful. But you're right. In this time, maybe we need to relook at that again.
Any further comments? Thank you, Mr. Casey,
Thank you very
for
much.
the good and bad news. Next item is a discussion item regarding Southern California Edison. Welcome, and if you could state your names for the record, please. You just get that right.
Thank you. Madam Chair and Commissioners, my name's John Britton, and I'm the area manager for the Southern California Edison Company. And we're before you today because I know that your concerns about the new design standards that Edison is going to incorporate probably late summer. We're here. This is Tom Wagner, our planner in Santa Barbara. We're here to answer any questions. I'll briefly go through why we're changing. Many years ago, as projects came online, people did not want our pad mount transformers. They did not approve of them because they were above ground. So there was an item in our standards that if someone wanted to pay for them to go completely underground, the transformer to go underground, that could happen. But we've had a lot of problems with these, we call them bird transformers, buried underground rural districts. We consider them to be dangerous for our crews to work on, because the only way they can work on them is lying right down on the ground and working on those small transformers, especially in tracks. We don't see that in commercial areas. So we decided we're the only utility in California that has this type of a system. And we have applied, sent a device letter to the PUC to go back to our old standard, take that one clause out where a customer can pay the extra and get it put underground, and to use a pad mount transformer. And I did bring some copies. I don't think I quite brought enough of what transformers look like when they're above ground. All of the other facilities that serve this transformer, everything else will be totally underground. What you'll see now, instead of a transformer that's underground, it will be above ground. It's called a pad mount transformer. We're mandated and want to work very closely with especially our architects, our design people, our consumers out there, to put these in an inconspicuous place on the property. As industrial sites, as you see, the transformers are quite large. They could be 4.5, 5 feet high, but they can be screened. We'll work with whoever, the architects, screen them with either fences or whatever. But we feel that we owe this to our employees, that it'll make the work safer. We'll have the service reliability will be greater, will be easier. It will be much easier to restore service rather than to remove a transformer from underground, where we have some problems with if oil gets into the ground, or we always have water intrusion. We'll be able to restore service a lot faster, and especially we'll have more control over the environment. If a transformer were to fail and the oil, of course, get loose into the ground and saturate. So there's a lot of advantages but number one for us is safety. It's almost mandated that we have to do something with these. Even though they're to a point they're safe underground, but when you have to get right down on them and work on them, they're not that safe for our crews. So I think that we will see the PUC accept this probably midsummer. That I don't see that many transformers downtown, except if there's no place to put them, then they will still have to go underground. Especially along the streets, there's just no place to put them. But I think primarily you'll see it in new construction, in industrial parks, and especially in tracks, homes, is where you'll see these. They won't come all at once. We're not going to change the existing ones out, except when we get to the point where there's no other equipment available, because we're the only ones using them. So we have to start somewhere, and this is where we're going to start, is installing these pad mount transformers. Is there any questions?
Well, if you're done with your presentation?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to ask for public comment. Seeing none. Mr. Limon, do you have something?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to supplement some of the initial discussions that I've had with Southern California Edison planners, and it really had to do with an acknowledgement that we really need to get this information on a plan quickly in the review process on the concept level, because what I'm hearing is that often the architects do not plan for these installations, and therefore there's a lack of pre-planning to site them, and we're stuck with locating these in front of a building sometimes unnecessarily without a lot of forethought. So I've agreed to talk to our planners to try to come in contact with Southern California Edison early, so you'll see a lot more, hopefully, interaction with them to ascertain what the needs are to place transformers on projects. And I think we have a better understanding that when those transformers would be required based on the size of the building and the number of units that are required. And I think I've got a commitment from them to try to make sure that that happens also. So I would also ask that the Commission ask the question, where is that transformer on the site, similar to those backflow devices that Louise always brings up. And that way we can engage with the architect and Southern California Edison on the actual location and screening of these installations.
And I think that's important, that our planning department has made the commitment that they will work closely with the architects and the owners and whoever else in order to come to a viable location for these transformers.
Thank you. I did open public comment, but I guess I'll open it again, Mr. DeForest.
Mr. Limon brought up a question. My question is for the Southern California Edison, how do you treat transformers that are located in other historical districts, the Pueblo Viejo being a historical district? How do you do that elsewhere in your area of service?
Thank you. How that's going to be handled is, if it's feasible, we're going to come with we will be installing the pad mount type transformers. If it is not feasible in an area downtown where you have your buildings are property line to property line, sidewalks, then it can't be. Then we'll have to go with the underground vaults and underground transformers. But each one of these will be on a will call basis, and we will work with the general public. We're not going to put these pad mounts right down in the middle of Paseo Nuevo, that's for sure. But we just want you to be aware that new construction coming along, this is what we're going to see. This will be the new standard.
Thank
And
you.
it's always we'll be able to discuss it with whoever and come up with some type of reason for it to a reasonable area for it.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the commission?
What was the impetus for putting the vault in the first place years ago? I mean, is it aesthetic?
Aesthetics. It looked better.
Thank you.
Mr. Sharp?
Yes, John, oftentimes we ask applicants to screen the pad mount transformer, and we hear many times we can't because Edison needs access, or it has to be 4 feet away, or whatever the situation. What are the criteria for?
There are still standards as to what you can do around that transformer, especially in the front of it. There's a national code that says you have to keep an 8-foot clearance in the front of it for people to work on it, because you work on it with hot sticks. You don't do it by hand. It's a stick that's 7 feet long, and you have to get in there and work on this energized transformer. But screening can be done with landscaping. It can be done with fencing, with stone. But those standards that were there are still there. You have to keep an 8-foot clearance in the front of the transformer and to the sides. But I wholeheartedly ask you to work with our planners and get screening that'll work, because there's really, as you see the pictures that I gave out, those transformers are standing right out in the middle of nowhere. They're not screened at all, and so they really stand out. But they can be screened and be less of a nuisance.
So just to clarify, you need 8 feet clearance in front
And on the sides.
and on the sides, both?
No.
2 of the sides, or just in front? What do you need on the sides?
I'll refer to Tom, but I believe there's 3-foot clearance on each side, isn't there?
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioners. On the rear and the sides of a pad, typically they sit on a pad. So on the rear and the sides of the pad, there must be 3 feet of clearance around the transformer. That can be reduced to 2 feet if it's a non-combustible surface, such as a brick or concrete wall. On the front, as Mr. Britton said, you need 8 feet of flat level working clearance. Now you can enclose that transformer, meaning you can put a gate in front of it as long as it's openable completely 180 degrees. So you get that 8 foot of working clearance if a gate or something can be opened. There can't be any roof or any obstruction on top of the transformer for heat dissipation as well as for crane access. Those are general guidelines, and as Mr. Britton said, we would look at each individual project on a case-by-case basis to come up with the best possible solution. There will have to be crane access next to the equipment, of course, so typically you'll see them in a parking lot or next to a parking lot. We also like to see the transformers next to the load center, meaning the shortest possible distance into the building, into the metering equipment, and that's for quality of service.
Thank you. Can I just clarify? So you mean you could put something like a trash enclosure around this, and you could put the gates, let's say, 3 feet from the front, as long as the gates can open out to an 8-foot clear area?
That's correct,
Thank you.
Madam Commissioner. There wouldn't be. You cannot enclose a transformer in with a trash enclosure.
No, I'm
if
just
you
saying
meant like a
similar,
trash
yes.
enclosure type structure,
Yes. Thank
yes,
you.
you could do that.
Great. Yes.
I've got 2 questions. One, do they always have to be the same dark green?
No.
So
Those
they-
can
they-
be painted any
Okay.
color you'd like to paint them.
Okay.
But there are specs that goes with that we can provide for you.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I have, if you have a building, for example, that has the parking on the ground level, can it be put within the parking area?
It can be put in the parking area, but it can't be put under a building.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions? Mr. Peugeot?
Well, I have some comments.
Okay, let's move to
Maybe
comments then.
questions too.
Oh.
Because I had, I know I've been working on this and with Mr. Wagner, and as you know, we are in the process of undergrounding all the utility lines on Chapala Street, 7 blocks of it. And it's a complex thing, and it's voluntary, and it takes a lot of money. So, and we just learned about this requirement, and these things are, if the information is correct, they're 4 feet high. It's like a 4-foot cube, 4'6", and then 4 feet, which is quite a bit, and it's one in the middle of each block. Right? So we're very concerned about that, and it may kill the project. It can be one of those things that might really. And so I'm interested in knowing exactly how close it can get with an enclosure, and also why it cannot be done on the parkway. Why does it have to be on private property?
It does not have to be on private property. It can be on the parkway. We prefer it on the property because it's back, and we would obtain an easement for it. But it can be in the parkway.
Mr. Michaud, I'd like to comment on it. I think Public Works also has a policy of discouraging private developers to use right-of-way for their service needs. So
that's the holdup.
Yeah.
Well, Madam Commissioner, Commissioner Pujol, the Edison standard, when we design a brand new housing tract or design an underground system like this, all of the flush-mounted boxes, what we call handholds, or the larger boxes called splice boxes, those can be in the parkway. But we put transformers behind sidewalk if there's a parkway, and we take an easement. And that's primarily for traffic safety. If we put one of the, typically parkway is 4 feet or 5 feet, so you're putting that piece of equipment right behind curb. So a lot of it has to do with traffic safety, and how we design the Chapala Street, for example, is consistent with our design standards. The 20A up on the Cliff Drive incorporates the same design standards. And just to clarify what Mr. Britton said, this is what Edison's done for years, the pad-mounted design for underground facilities. There is a clause in our rules that allow someone to pay for a buried transformer, what we call an added facilities clause, either a one-time fee or a monthly fee added to the bill. We just want to remove that clause and go with strictly a pad-mounted piece of equipment, which is standard with all the other utilities in California.
Thank you. Any further comment? Oh.
Madam,
when everybody's done, I just have a question.
Okay.
I do have one question. I'm looking at page 1, example single-phase residential pad mount, just a couple of photographs. This may be obvious, but I'll ask it anyway. How many homes does such a thing serve?
Well, that depends on the amount of load, the size of the homes that each home draws, and distance.
So a regular residential neighborhood, let's say, a block.
That really depends. It could be 5 to 20.
Okay.
It just varies on the design. And
so we're not going to see like 4 or 5 in each block, I would assume.
Probably not, but I would reserve that. It could possibly. I don't think in the downtown area or city blocks you would see that because the homes are relatively small and they don't draw a lot of power.
All right. Thank you.
Any further comments before Ms. Gantz has her question? Okay.
I'm just wondering if the opening where you have to have access for a person to work on it, can that be on any side? Can the customer, or can we specify that the opening be on, say, the inside versus the outside? Say if it was a landmark house in EPV and they were going to put this in their front yard, could we specify that the access opening be on the inside of the yard so that it could be screened wholly without having to have, wood doors or something on the front facing the street?
I think that's a good question. I'd like to answer that. We've made a commitment that our planners are going to work with the owners and the architects to try to accomplish this with the least impact, and I would say yes.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just one comment.
Yes.
I have been to Williamsburg, Virginia recently, the historic district, but I doubt very seriously that there are many of these in the middle of that district.
You know, in your older districts, like we have in Santa Barbara, one of the oldest underground districts in California, you probably still won't see that many, but in a new construction is where you'll see them, a new office building or something like that. But our vaults downtown are all established, and we will continue using those. We're not going to change those out.
Thank you.
Where you're primarily looking at is new construction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yes.
I think in a new construction you can handle a lot of different things, especially in new commercial construction. You find a place to put these vaults out of the way and so forth. The problem will be in conditions like the one describing, like you have a built residential area, the transformers come down from the poles, they got to go somewhere. That is a difficult thing, and I really ask for your help in this particular case and all others that may happen. That's really where the problem is. It's not going to be in a new building. A new commercial building has plenty of room
Sure.
somewhere. Where people
Yeah, on the type of work you're talking about, it's an existing facility, and I don't know. I guess it's a difference between a pole there with all the material on the top and a transformer, one transformer sitting in the middle. The residential, like you're speaking there, I'm sure that's residential area, and those transformers are pretty small. The pad mounts themselves.
40 cube.
They're about 3. I don't think they're 4 feet
they're
tall.
not
They're about
4 foot
3 to
tall.
3.5 feet tall.
Oh, okay.
They
it's
get
a-
bigger as the size or the load increases, they get bigger.
Thank you very much, and I think we understand.
Okay.
Take
Thank you.
the next item, which is 914 Santa Barbara Street. We are here for final review of the solar installation portion of the project.
I have pictures myself.
Yes. Public. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Join us.
Welcome back. We're getting set up here. Sorry. Thanks. Would you introduce yourselves for the record and in your presentation?
Hello, I'm Steve Andre. I'm the member of the Santa Barbara Contractors Association and Built Green, and I'm the project designer.
Thank you.
And I'm Dan George, and I'm the representative of the Board of Directors of Santa Barbara Contractors Association.
Thank you.
I'm Parasiotto, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara Contractors Association and President of Built Green Santa Barbara.
Thank you. Would you like to show us what you've done since the last time we
Chair?
met? Oh, yes,
Can I
I'm
just
sorry.
preamble with
You
one
did ask
thing that
me.
might help you with your decision? I passed out at the beginning of the meeting the letter from the state Department of Parks and Recreation, the state historian, and basically we had asked for this letter last week to use in place of our standard letter report. They find that essentially the placement of the solar panel in this position, size, and configuration would not cause a significant impact on the building, that it follows the Secretary of the Interior standards. They basically predicate that on the fact that it's reversible, it can be removed, that there's an agreement that when better technology comes out and the panel can be made smaller, they will make it smaller. There's a landscape buffer that's proposed, although the state does make a suggestion that our landscape architecture take a look at and see if he agrees with it. And each of you have this letter in your possession, so it's a state property. The state seems to feel that this is not a negative impact, and so I think that that information should be weighed as you're reviewing this final.
Thank you. That is an important step to our review, and I'll remind the Commission that we are here to look at the aesthetic issues regarding these panels, and just as with any rooftop equipment or any roof, we will be looking at how it looks on the building.
So the last time we were here, you asked if we could give you a better idea of what it looked like in elevation. So I sort of ghosted the panels in behind the elevation, so you could see roughly the size that they were and where they sit. So I did that. And then Mr. Pujo had asked that I change the labeling on the elevations to match sort of the more conventional way that it's done normally here. But I looked again at the original plans, which is on page A4, and remembered that that's why I labeled them, because that's the way that they were originally labeled. So I left them the same so they wouldn't conflict with the original plan. And then in the also was asked if we looked at the also look at maybe using an island oak instead of the coast live oak. I looked at several pictures, any that I could find on the web, and found that the island oak, a beautiful tree, tended to be very vertical. And what we need here in order to screen the panels is rather something a little bit more horizontal, because we're because the ground level where the tree is planted is actually about 4 feet above the floor level of the building. We don't really need a very tall tree in order to screen it. In fact, it's better to have a short, bushy tree. I sort of felt the same way about the recommendation that the state historian made to maybe use a blue oak. It grows 50 to 80 feet tall, which wouldn't very effectively screen the panels. It's also a deciduous tree, so it loses its leaves in the winter, and it wouldn't screen it in the winter, and then it would be too tall in the summer. It would shade the panels. So I still sort of like the coast live oak for a screen. They also recommended that possibly we look at a cordyline australis, which is sort of it's more of a plant, sort of I don't know if you all know what it is, but maybe we can get some help. And we would consider doing that. We might be able to put 2 or 3 of those in, and they grow fast enough, and they would be tall enough that they would provide a fairly effective screen.
Thank you. I think our last comment that I'd like you to speak to is that the solar panel should be a dark color and be integrated into the roof structure as much as possible. Have you got a detail or showing how that is integrated, or a cut sheet? Something that we
don't
talk
have a
about.
cut sheet. I mean, I did bring one of the panels in originally in the first go. I had one in the back of and they're framed in black anodized aluminum. I think you can see in this elevation here, we've got them just right against the roof, just high enough to mount them. We don't have there's no structure there to hold them up at a 45-degree angle or anything. They're just flat on the roof. So they're black panels with black trim, flat on the roof, so as low as we can get them.
Thank you. Are you done with your presentation? I will open this to public comment, and I do have someone for public comment. Well, why don't you, any of these microphones, turn it on and introduce yourself. And
have to get down.
Madam Chair and members of the Commission, my name's Karen Feeney. I am here today representing the Sustainability Project. Also just want to mention that in my former position at the Community Environmental Council, I worked with the city staff and the community at large on the Million Solar Roofs program to try to promote and encourage the use of solar energy in this community. Our letter from the Sustainability Project, which I have copies of, I didn't necessarily bring enough. Hopefully there's enough for folks that are here today. This letter is written in support of the Santa Barbara Contractors Association Built Green Santa Barbara's request to install a solar photovoltaic system on their recently remodeled Green Building Resource Center. While TSP appreciates the Historic Landmark Commission's efforts to protect the historic character of Santa Barbara, historical preservation must respect current realities. Allowing upgrades that improve the overall energy efficiency or energy independence of historic structures is an essential part of HLC's responsibilities. This is where history meets current imperatives. It is particularly important where such upgrades are virtually invisible from surrounding public streets, as is the case with the Built Green SB's request. It is the policy of the City of Santa Barbara to support green building practices, including the use of solar energy. Given this, the City and all of its advisory committees and departments should promote and take pride in efforts to be energy self-sufficient. It is especially important to support models of energy self-sufficiency that educate the public about the benefits of solar energy and green building, which is the purpose of the Green Building Resource Center. We encourage you to approve Built Green's request without conditions that would reduce the efficacy of their solar system. I have a little bit of concern about planting trees in front of a solar system and the potential conflicts that might result in that regard. Sincerely, the Sustainability Project Board of Directors. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may read the motion that we made you may not have heard this 2 weeks ago. It says, continued 2 weeks with the following comments. The Commission is in support of photovoltaic panel installations. This is an opportunity to set an example of how solar panels on a historic building should be installed and to show the public not only the sustainability but the merits of sustainability and historic preservation. I'll go to questions from the Commission. If there are no questions, I'll have comments.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I don't think that I have to be sold on the efficacy of solar systems and the advantageous nature of my. And I think I made the comment last 2 weeks ago, I think you were here, that if Pearl Chase had been alive, she would have been wholeheartedly with such a project. She was a very pragmatic person. We invoke Pearl Chase often. I think this is wonderful. I do think, and Robert, Commissioner Adams can help, but a coastal live oak, my understanding, is not a tall tree. It's more of a spreading oak. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So would that be, that might be, I think that was also, it's on our agenda. So if that's the case and you're not looking, you don't want height because you don't want to block the view, the sun's access from the west. But you want to block, we would like to see something screen those things to leave it as historically significant as possible. Modernity is upon us, but we still need to sort of make this facade of how things used to look, I suppose. So I support this
Thank you.
project.
Any further comments? Mr. Adams?
I appreciate you looking into the Quercus tomentella. It's a native tree to this area that's a little bit underused. So thank you for exploring that. I also said that the Quercus agrifolia can have a nice horizontal character. I want to react to the letter that was sent from State Parks. I don't think a blue oak is appropriate for Santa Barbara or for this resource. So I would side with using the Quercus agrifolia. It can stay horizontal and not get too tall to block views. So I want to hear what the other commissioners have to say, and then I'll come back to some other landscape comments.
Madam Chair,
Okay.
I would be perfectly willing to give this final approval, which is, I believe, what they're asking for, with whatever tree Mr. Adams feels is the ideal.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so let's talk about landscaping. I just have a couple comments. So can we go to the plan view? In my opinion, we ask everyone to screen, and I think that with some landscape efforts, that this building is set back, and I think some landscaping will help to screen this project. I went to look at the site, so I think that a centrally located Quercus agrifolia.
I need to have this moved back into the center so that the TV audience can understand what's going on. Thank you.
Optimally situated, probably won't get too tall and will do a good job in screening this system from the solar panel from this point of view. However, there's a nice planting bed here, and my suggestion is whatever needs to be removed get integrated into this planting bed over on this side of the stairs. And then with the addition of some of the cabbage trees that were suggested by the state parks letter, the cordylines are gorgeous trees. They, in a mass, they wouldn't do a great job of screening, but they're very interesting, and they could help soften the solar panels from this point of view.
Mhm.
And then it's also suggested that there's a plant material down here that's invasive that could be removed. I agree with that assessment, but I think that the beautiful kind of native Southern California garden that's there, I think things could be moved around.
Mhm.
The invasive sort of cane plant
Right,
be removed.
the giant cane.
And that the cordyline, perhaps two of them together could really bring this garden together. And the fact that this solar panel could be reversible, this is not a big test case for us. I think that because the building's set back, this would be screened with some of these landscape solutions. So it's a win-win for everybody. We get a little solar power for the building, which is great. We get some screening, albeit not perfect screening, but well enough since the building's set back, and we get a tree out of it too, a native tree for habitat. So I think this is a win-win situation.
Madam Chair,
So
do we need to have the details of the plantings brought to the consent calendar?
I'll ask.
We can wrap it up now.
I would be much happier.
Yeah. So we're having an oak, and if there's anything else that you would like, it's just
only thing
make
I
it.
want to say is, coastline grows, they grow very slow. So let's start with the 48 to 60 inch box, and look for the character of horizontal.
Mhm.
This tree doesn't have to be too high because of the situation of the driveway, and the building is stepped down to a lower height. But what we're looking for is fullness on the tree. So I'd say a 48-inch box or 60-inch box would be appropriate. The only other note is really take whatever you're removing, where that tree is going to be, and integrate it into other areas of the garden, and to implement some cordyline. And there are beautiful cordylines available in local wholesale nurseries.
Okay.
And they would look wonderful with that whole garden.
Yes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Yes. So this is going to consent? No?
No.
All right. But simply with these comments regarding the 48, just pick a box. Don't say 48 to 60. Let's just pick a box number.
It's 60 in the
60-inch
60-inch
Coast live
box.
oak with a horizontal character, salvage,
And full character.
removed planting and integrated into the existing, and use cordyline in some
And use
way.
a minimum of one cordyline species tree in a 15-gallon, 10-gallon cordyline species on the planter to the right of the steps as you look toward the building.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? And I do have one question for Jake. This letter says predicated on the following conditions. So they are saying predicated on the following conditions, and it's talking about a particular type of tree. Are we allowed to override this statement?
I think that because if you look at the the way that the discussion on the tree is separated out, I think they're leaving us some leeway. It's our backyard, so to speak.
Okay.
I think that we know better what's the appropriate tree with our own landscape architect. So I'll go on the hook for that if there's
Thank you.
any better.
Thank you.
Also, the letter states you could consider using
Exactly.
fertilizer.
It's giving
So he's giving us leeway.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
But what I would suggest is that, the Contractors Association get back with the final result to the trust.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.